Let me start off by saying this. I had a lukewarm reaction to the main story of the base game of Cyberpunk 2077. Sure, the story is filled with a compelling main problem, interesting and nuanced characters, rich dialogue, and a stunning first-person cinematic system as a conduit for it all. But it lacked the emotional oomph I was looking for, especially at critical or key moments. Maybe if you boil it down to it, it was due to pacing or its short runtime, maybe that I wanted more connective tissue between the characters, especially Jackie, or even an incongruence between the urgency of the Relic and the moments of downtime. But there was something about our pursuit of excising our silver-limbed sidekick that felt like CDPR hadn't dug as deep into me, the player, as the Relic had formed its roots in the trenches of our character's grey matter. My experience with Phantom Liberty has not been the same. As the credits rolled for my first playthrough, my eyes started to well up with tears, and not even 10 minutes prior my jaw had hit the floor. As if that wasn't enough, that specific playthrough unlocked the new base game ending, where again I couldn't contain my emotions. Contrast this with the "is that it" reaction I had with my first ending in 2020, and CD PROJEKT RED has concluded Cyberpunk 2077's lifecycle by not choosing the quiet life of accepting Cyberpunk 2077's fate as a write-off game, but in a blaze of glory, scratching and crawling its way back into relevancy. Now, Phantom Liberty is not perfect, and I'll be pointing out its flaws, shortcomings, and setbacks, but having now completed two drastically different endings, with the second being absolutely on par with the first run-through in terms of emotional weight, I can say that this might just be CD PROJEKT RED's strongest writing to date. CDPR's special sauce is on full display in its dialogue. It felt like each dialogue decision, whether I'd been led to believe was large or small at that time, had me scrolling through each of the options with equal stock, reading and mulling over each choice carefully, but many times still just being at a loss for which dialogue option to pick. As I was progressing through the main story and even the stellar side content in Dogtown, I kept saying to myself, surely this next set of choices won't be as excruciatingly difficult as the last one. And sure enough, Phantom Liberty would rise to the occasion and pose its next level of problems with a multitude of nebulous and murky solutions. I routinely found myself confronted by 3 to 5 yellow dialogue options, which are meant to lock you into a specific train of thought and progress the conversation with the character or NPC. Each time I would hesitate, scroll to a standout option, think about it, reread it weighing the pros and cons, and hesitate enough to jump to another standout choice to do it all over again. There was even a pivotal moment with time dialogue that presented 2 yellow options, and in my panic I chose the option which is not the one I actually would have chosen. I knew something of the sort was coming and had mentally chosen my option beforehand, but for that micro moment something about that other option clicked and I was compelled to choose it right before the timer hit 0. And that's the beauty of Phantom Liberty. You might know what's coming, but how are you actually going to handle it when all the cards are on the table? Phantom Liberty is heavy on the dialogue, and in a tier of its own when it comes to disorienting the player and trying to throw them off. There are even dialogue checks at key moments where you need to recall key information. I won't spoil it, but you should be taking mental note of when things feel off, or even more impressively, nuanced changes in the body language of the characters around you that indicate you might have said something abrasive. If you've watched my Cyberpunk review of the base game, you'd know that the cinematic scene system was a home run for me. And here it's a full-on grand slam because it can tether itself to these more meaningful and hard choices. The new and even the old characters like Johnny Silverhand are more grounded. They add unique and diverse perspectives. They have more complex and interwoven thought processes alongside very human problems. Each crucial character with their own values, morals, ethics, and ultimate goals. Something that's even threaded throughout Dogtown's excellent gigs, which I'll talk about a bit later. After each pitch I received from the characters on what I should believe, I would sit and soak it in. And just before I felt like I was ready to make that final decision, good old Johnny would show up to reframe my outlook, sometimes with uncharacteristic empathy, other times in well-formulated arguments, but always with a layer of sarcasm and angst to protect his hurt psyche. And many times I would find myself actually agreeing with him. The spy thriller theme lends itself beautifully to this complex set of relationships that you build in Dogtown, and you have impact on not only how these relationships progress and who's actually going to be at your side at the end of it all, but you're also an agent of change in the political structure of Dogtown. There's environmental changes you can make through your actions, which will be apparent to just about anyone with functioning eyes. The base game was criticized for not being able to affect any meaningful world change in Night City, but that's actually not true. Many of these changes are so deeply hidden that the average player just wouldn't find it, a criticism that developer CDPR has publicly acknowledged as a lesson for their future content, and something I think they've actually taken to heart here. Phantom Liberty takes place around midway through the base game of Cyberpunk 2077, and will unlock after you've done the main quest line in Pacifica. As you pick up to leave this zit on NC's ass, as some of the characters aptly put it, you'll be called by an unknown contact known as Songbird, offering to solve your Relic problem in exchange for assistance in a time-sensitive matter of dire importance. A top-tier netrunner, Somi or Songbird, is contacting you via the Relic, while President Myers and her are on board the Space Force 1. SF-1 has been hacked and has come hurtling down within Dogtown, a lawless district run by the Barghest militia. Somi mentions that the Barghest leader, Kurt Hansen, is likely behind this, as tensions between him and the NUSA are high, and this is how Phantom Liberty kicks off. Phantom Liberty hits strong action and spy movie highs and themes. The story starts off in what feels like Escape from New York, and then turns into more of a Mission Impossible or Casino Royale, with undertones of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and it doesn't ever really look back. If I had to recommend one franchise to watch that helps encapsulate Phantom Liberty, it has to be Mission Impossible. There were times where I was thinking to myself, especially in some of the absolutely brilliant gameplay segments in the story, that this is something that Ethan Hunt would do. I won't share those exact moments, I really want you guys to experience those for yourself, but there are 3 distinct times where I got literal goosebumps and the hairs on my arms were standing up. In these instances, everything coalesced together perfectly. Music, action, story implications, and gameplay. I even watched these back on my captured gameplay and still got goosebumps. That's how good these specific moments are. There's also one segment tied to music, again I won't spoil it, where immediately after I just knew that Phantom Liberty from a cinematic and storytelling standpoint was going to be something special. Let's talk about Phantom Liberty's main characters, starting off with Johnny. I actually didn't like Keanu's acting in the base game, but something about his cadence, tone, delivery, and writing has made me appreciate what he brings to the table so much more. Possibly because he's cut from the same cloth as Reed, and this veteran military tenure over him allows him to really psychoanalyze Reed, giving more depth and intrigue to everything that he says. I think Silverhand's background is a much more natural fit for Dogtown's narrative, but the content is of a much more political and militarized nature. It's crazy to think that not too long ago, a hill I would have died on was that Keanu was miscast as Johnny, because across the board in Phantom Liberty he is phenomenal. Solomon Reed, portrayed by Idris Elba, is a worthy equal. He's a gruff, grizzled, and troubled individual with a dogmatic attitude perfectly suited for Dogtown. Elba plays the character well, which starts from your unique first encounter with him, which by the way increased my love of the cinematic scene system even more, and he doesn't take his foot off the gas with his portrayal ever. Your respect for him is tempered by Silverhand, and Johnny bounces concepts, ideas, and his own ramblings off of Elba's character effortlessly. Songbird is meant to be a polarizing character, and you'll quickly either love her or hate her. I personally didn't like her right when I met her, but she is equally crucial to the story and equally important to Reed himself. It's very much a father-daughter-like relationship. I think regardless of your love or hate for her, you'll enjoy her progression through the story. I also do recommend watching the cinematic trailer for the expansion. I obviously watched it after I'd finished PL, but I feel like it sets up some background that you may or may not miss in the game. President Myers and Kurt Hansen are key players as well, and I think Kurt Hansen is Cyberpunk's best villain, since he's not just a straight boogeyman like Smasher. There's some real substance to him, and you'll find out soon that the reason he's aggregated so much power and respect is because he is razor sharp, and a worthy adversary to Reed. Although I will say Hansen doesn't let anything get in the way of his business. Hansen is much more shrewd. Myers was a bit of a weaker character in my opinion. She fits her archetype well, but I wouldn't say she delivered anything of substance, and actually takes a bit more of a backseat than I initially would have thought. Maybe this fits her role as a president, unreactive, unemotional, unbound by her tough decisions, but I didn't feel like I got a lot out of her. In terms of our character, I had about 70 hours on my male V playthrough in the base game before I switched to female V and began another. Female V, in my opinion, delivers each line with so much more emotion and range versus male V, who gives a much more stoic and flat performance. I suppose it's really up to you in terms of who you want to roleplay as, but without hesitation, I would recommend playing as female V. Cyberpunk's story also expands the lore in new and exciting ways. It also leaves a ton of doors open for the sequel in Cyberpunk Orion, and I think CDPR has a lot to work with in the future. I personally love that they've kept so many things open-ended. I love when movies do it. I love when we get to extrapolate and think beyond the limits of the content that they've given us. And I can recall at least 5 things that I either want clarity on or want to see what happens next with. It's a lot for you lore junkies to sink your teeth into, and again, this makes me overwhelmingly excited for Orion. Pacifica was and still is my least favorite district in Night City, but I would have to say Dogtown is probably neck and neck with Watson in terms of what I would consider are the best zones on the map. Obviously large in part due to the amount of content in both. Dogtown is the perfect mix of high-tech lowlife and post-apocalyptic. The Barghest militia patrol what is Dogtown's main strip, but you'll also find the Stacks, a community of layered housing at the end of this strip. The Stacks feel similar to the housing in Kabuki, or what you'd find in Ready Player One with shipping containers and tin roofs aplenty. Dogtown presents its environments with much more verticality than the base game, which is a bit odd considering the buildings that you're going into are for the most part destroyed. This is definitely more on par with the verticality I wish was explorable in the base game. Sure, Kabuki has similarly layered housing, but the structures in Dogtown feel more intentionally placed and lived in. I've often referred to Night City as a beautiful painting and less of a playground, and Dogtown does feel a lot less like that. It doesn't artificially lock you out of buildings and lets you explore with a bit more freedom. Now I don't know if this should be a strike against CDPR or something for, and I do want to keep in mind that the pace at which I was reviewing the game was not the way that the average person will play, and so I am cognizant of that. But I just feel that 13 main missions and 17 side quests is a bit on the light side. While it took me 15 hours to complete the main story and around 27 hours to complete everything in Dogtown, I can't help but feel that the 3-year development of Phantom Liberty was hampered by post-launch support for the base game. It's also unfortunate that CD PROJEKT RED is dropping Red Engine in favor of Unreal, meaning that Cyberpunk 2077 will receive this one and only one expansion. I genuinely think that an expansion that replaces the intro mission with Jackie would round out this package beautifully, and I can't help but feel a bit slighted that Cyberpunk won't receive another. I also don't think that PL does a good job of adding more content to the existing buildings of Night City, nor do I think it uses Pacifica outside of Dogtown's walls to its full potential. I think areas other than Watson could have benefited from new gigs, and they didn't have to create all this new content specifically for Dogtown. Watson contains a bulk of the current gigs as well as the best ones, and this would have been a great opportunity to bring up districts with weaker content. Now there are vehicle gigs that are infinitely replayable, which helped immensely and are quite good for what they are, but not enough for me to not still have this feeling that Pacifica in particular could have used a bit more side content. That being said, gigs and the side content in Dogtown are for the most part excellent story additions. You'll be receiving a lot of this side content from Mr. Hands, who will play more of a role in the main story and who reminds me a lot of Faraday from Edgerunners. These gigs have a darker, more serious tone overall, and making decisions here is equally hard, if not harder than the main story, just because of how many times you're missing key information and context. I do have to say, Mr. Hands is not only a strongly voiced character, but his discretion and ability to convey information makes him a standout fixer. Let's talk a little bit more about the gigs. Gigs are more political in nature, and Dogtown is this kind of hidden gem in the NUSA, perfectly ripe for shady biz. Brazil, Poland, Russia, Cuba, and other places around the world have representation in the form of characters in this city within a city, which gives Dogtown this feeling of being a port for the globe, gives legitimacy to Night City, and reminds the player that the rest of the world is also out there with their own set of problems that they're facing. Corporations are not welcomed in Dogtown, but they still do have influence on the players inside. Whether they're escaping from their clutches or are proxies for them, well, you'll just have to play and see. Silverhand also pops up more often during these gigs and again adds brilliant interjections of his opinion, and actually is pretty influential in some of the decisions that you can make. No, the gigs don't hit quite the same peaks as say the Joshua Stevenson quest or the Hunt, but overall I think Dogtown has the best written gigs in the game, and there's even extremely unique ways that stories within some of these gigs are told. The funny gigs are hit or miss. There was one with the police which I didn't particularly enjoy, but there was also one with the Braindance star that was not only incredibly funny, but also oddly thought-provoking at the same time. There's also a gig that involves the animals that was a miss for me, but those are really the only outliers in terms of gigs that I didn't really have strong feelings about. I will say that many of the standard gigs feel more like full pieces of side content, and many of them are quite a bit lengthier. It won't simply be get into this building, steal something and leave, and there's a larger story component beyond talking with the fixer or getting a majority of the details via text. Airdrops, which are sort of this infinite gig, help remedy that there aren't as many gigs as I would have hoped for, and you will hear the jets of AVs coming into Dogtown airspace, dropping crates in a variety of set locations that you'll have to discover and hack. This is to give you access to some of the more interesting weapons and loot in the game. I really like these, mainly because I think it's great to have a repeatable task like a looter shooter, trying to find some of the best gear that isn't tied to a boss or a vendor. Some of them will even come with their own little mini narratives in the form of shards, or even environmental storytelling elements which give more insight into those specific drops. Now there are a few variations of these airdrops. We have retake styled encounters where you will come across an already guarded drop, and to claim your loot you'll have to take down the Bargus members guarding it. There are shootout styled encounters where rival factions will be in the middle of a conflict. Again, you'll have to take them out and can use the fact that they're already fighting as sort of a smokescreen to drop them all covertly. Then you'll have the ambush style drops where you'll think the coast is clear, but as soon as you pick up the loot you get swarmed. There's also completely unguarded drops that have not been attended to yet, which will give you a free pass to hack and extract the goodies. I enjoyed these. The AVs constantly streaming in to drop these did make Dogtown feel more alive, and although this is not a feature across the rest of the city, I feel this is a pseudo minigame or activity where you're looking for the best loot, and it's a really good addition in my opinion. Another open world activity that originates in Dogtown but continues throughout the rest of Night City is El Capitan's courier missions, where you'll have to deliver cars to his chop shop. For these quests you'll either be chased or have to hack objectives or cars, or get to certain locations on a timer or without damaging your vehicle. I enjoyed both of these during my 60+ hours in the game, but the jury is still out on whether this will really sink its teeth into the player base, where they're going to want to come back and do these activities. My assumption is it actually won't be, but depending on post-launch support, I could be eating my words on that one. Now a lot of the content in Phantom Liberty lead to boss fights, which was something that Cyberpunk didn't fully embrace in the base offering. I really appreciate how much more diversity there is with bosses in Phantom Liberty. There's one in particular that is absolutely phenomenal, and a few off-the-grid encounters that are pretty standard fights but that are placed in interesting arenas, a real testament to the level design. Beyond that, don't expect anything revolutionary from boss fights in terms of the actual design of the fights, or even the set pieces that prop them up. Again, I appreciate the diversity, but I think leaning less into the humanoid encounters and having more machine-type boss variations would have made these feel a bit more diverse in terms of their gameplay loops. But personally, it's not a big pain point for me, and it's a marked improvement over the base game's, well, quite frankly, completely forgettable boss fights. There's only so many things a humanoid boss can really do, and many of them rely on their reflex boosters or bullet time skills, and didn't offer anything beyond that. There is one encounter towards the tail end of Phantom Liberty that was incredibly frustrating as well. This encounter was less of a boss fight and more of a trial and error session, filled with repeating the same task over and over to make it through, and it felt uncharacteristically unlike CDPR. It's a shame because it's set in an amazing location with multiple, fantastic story-based payoffs. However, the tedium involved in this one overstayed its welcome. The gameplay here was the lowest I think Phantom Liberty dips to, but it was offset slightly by the story highs. Now I will say that this segment of the game was the most frightening, turning PL into a pseudo-horror game. Seriously, it got my heart pumping more than anything else in Dogtown. Maybe it's more about guiding the player a little bit more on what to do here. I think there's a visual indicator that helps make sense of it all, but I don't think dying over and over again and trial and error for this encounter should be the way to progress, and I think it could use some tweaking. You'll know what I'm talking about when you're playing, and I would wager that most people would find this one just a bit of a pain in the ass. I'm already not looking forward to replaying this certain segment in subsequent playthroughs, which is pretty telling. Another time, I also did have a pretty important boss clipped through the ground, although this was a bug CDPR was aware of in the pre-patch version, so I'm really hoping that this one gets fixed in the full release. Since you're probably thinking about it, let's talk about bugs, let's talk about performance issues, glitches, and crashes. While patch 2.0 and the rest of Night City beyond Dogtown ran extremely smoothly, it's evident that Dogtown is not optimized to the same degree, namely in two areas. The first is the black market, which probably has the highest NPC density in the game, alongside the shimmer of glitching neon signs, stacks of weaponry, and endless bags of trash. The other is right outside the stadium in front of the stairs, again with a variety of pulsing neon signs outside. I also experienced FPS dips in the stacks, the housing at the end of the main road in Dogtown. I did have to drop my settings down from RT Ultra to ensure I got a playable frame rate, but these are two areas where I consistently ran into issues. In the base game, this would only happen in the high density outside Victor's Clinic and from time to time in Corporal Plaza. For reference, I have a 3080 and a 3700X. In terms of environmentals, I think that when the rain works, it also looks slightly better than even the latest patches. But in Dogtown specifically, there was this odd shimmer or distortion that obscured the background and made the edges of environments all jagged when it did rain. This is an issue that's probably made worse based on the depth of field blur and cinematic moments in the backgrounds, and could also be tied to DLSS, but it's also worth noting. In my 65 hours of play, I experienced a few bugs, the biggest offender being the boss that clipped through the ground, and I did have a few crashes. Changing my settings would also pop me back into Dogtown with incredibly low FPS, but this wouldn't happen in the rest of the city. Toward the tail end of my time with the game, crashing got a little bit more frequent. For what it's worth, CDPR did offer a console key this time around. Circling back, I mentioned level design as something that transformed an otherwise pretty vanilla boss encounter into a great one, and a massive strength of Phantom Liberty in Dogtown is the level design. Gigs and side content are set in much more elaborate, interesting, and bespoke areas and levels. While in the base game, levels could really be chunked down to a set of rooms connected to a hall which would connect to other rooms, and maybe a staircase leading down. But Phantom Liberty diversifies things to make it feel like they're all handcrafted. I think the closest thing in the base game, level design wise, that I can compare to Phantom Liberty is the gig in Watson where you meet with Corporal Hare. If you want a better idea on what PL would look like from a level design standpoint, I would replay that one. Caved in ceilings form rubble from crumbling cement and rebar in Phantom Liberty, and paths almost always feel unique and fresh. There are multiple paths to approach encounters, and they're hidden well enough from each other. Let's get a bit more into the gameplay. Cyberpunk 2077's readapted perks and skills are a pretty impressive departure from the mundane perks prior. Whether you want to be a netrunner, a strong solo, a fast solo, a garrote enthusiast, or you want to rely on weaponizing your body with cyberware, there's something here for each taste and preference. Melee felt underwhelming in the base game, and although if you were to compare Melee then with Melee now without any other perks added to the mix, it would only feel slightly different, the perks and skills really offer new ways to play that add depth to the Melee system. Deflecting bullets, the ability to leap great distances with your mantis blades, and the mobility of the air dash helped me turn a pretty vanilla slice and dice playstyle into a more visceral cyber ninja playstyle that made me feel like more of a super soldier than I had prior. Shooting guns also feels like it's undergone some smoothing and a few refinements, but other than that, it's more or less on par with what you've experienced in the base game. I'm not sure if this is actually a change or if I'm misremembering, but the sound design across weapons and even cars seems to have gotten a refinement, helping it feel more impactful. There's also a big change to stamina. Now firing a weapon will drain your stamina. There are definitely trees that are more stacked or flashy than others, but overall I think there's a really meaningful distribution between unique ways to play, unique modifiers, and percentage increases across most if not all of the trees. It's a really strong offering here that will keep you engaged for multiple playthroughs. I will say I was a bit disappointed with the tech weapon tree. In theory it sounded like a standout, but in practice it played a little clunky. If I had to pick my favorites, it would definitely be reflexes and intelligence. I also really like the skill pull. I think this is a skill that was developed almost entirely through player feedback and allows you to shoot grenades out of the air easier, creating a more powerful blast. Cyberpunk is all about style over substance, and I think that the team has seen just how flashy high-skill players can be, and wanted to really emphasize these playstyles. The hybrid system lets you really choose what side of the pendulum you want to swing to. Do you want style, which are skills like pull, or do you want substance, which are percentage-based skills that still do exist even in the legend tier perks? Relic skills felt powerful. I really enjoyed the vulnerability analytics and the monowire tree, although it would have been really wonderful to have an additional new armed cybernetic with a new relic skill for people to play with. I think this is a big missed opportunity. One of the best changes CD PROJEKT RED has implemented is making iconic weapons in Cyberware much more impactful to the way you play. The creativity here with the iconic modifiers is CDPR at their best. For example, there's a knife and pistol combo, where if you throw the knife at the enemy's legs, and then follow it up with a shot from the pistol where you've just thrown the knife, it would instantly reset into your hands instead of waiting for the cooldown. In practice, it was admittedly a bit challenging and not overly worth it, but this is the kind of divergent and creative thinking that's a feature of a lot of the new iconic weapons that Cyberpunk offers. For the most part, I enjoyed the new weapons I got hands on with, but I didn't even get to experience some of the ones that I've seen in the trailers, meaning that there's still more weapons to unearth even after 60+ hours in the game. This also extends to Cyberware, which opens up the Cyberware capacity system and features unique changes that really refine how you play. These interact with your skills and attributes and have distinct modifiers that change how you play. CDPR has even changed existing iconic weapons. For example, Fenrir now shoots electrical rounds that have the chance to disable Cyberware, and Dying Knight now has a completely different look. I really appreciate these changes since iconics were flat out boring before. A more stat-based change is that Cyberware now offers Attunements, which grant additional percentage-based bonuses based on your attribute layout. For example, a piece of Cyberware can be cool attuned, meaning that you get a specific increase for each point that you've invested into cool. It's little things like this that increase the depth of choice and consequence and help with replayability and longevity. Cyberware debuffs if you spec into Edgerunner and overchrome your body scales as you level. The higher your capacity and the more that you breach into that red with Edgerunner and stack your body with chrome, the worse the health debuffs. At lower levels I was hit with a -4 health debuff, but later on I was at -31. Let's talk about the open world and open world reactivity. I still believe that this is a sore spot for the game, but it is in a better state now. Cops will be walking the streets, you'll see gang conflict from time to time, NPCs do a few more things beyond simply walking or talking on the phone, and junkies will approach you if you're in their vicinity for too long, and there also does seem to be some more patrols. That being said, Cyberpunk 2077's Night City doesn't stray too far from what it used to be. I really wish there were more pockets of gang activity beyond 3 people standing together. It would have been nice to see them do interesting things like shady dealings, partaking in substances, taking hostages, or even just prowling the streets, emulating what the cops currently do. I still have some exploring to do, but I didn't see monumental changes here, which if I'm being honest, I wasn't even expecting. I think back to the 48-minute demo and the marketing here is still not accurate for 2.0's Night City, and the more I reflect on this, the more that I think that the 48-minute demo is more of a pitch for Cyberpunk's sequel. Night City also lacks the life sim elements that I know many players are looking for. CDPR has mentioned that they're not looking to add things like sitting down on benches or casino games or anything like that, but I can't help but feel that if there were a few activities like this, it would have helped the world feel a bit more like you could partake in the things regular city dwellers would do, with less emphasis on strictly merc work. The police and vehicle combat system meshes amazingly together, and the weaponized vehicles add even more to the mix. I think these two systems in combination can make Cyberpunk 2077 a completely chaotic experience, which fits the dark future motif much better. I'll talk a bit more about this in my guide releasing on the 25th, don't miss that one, but for my opinions on it, I think it's exceptionally well implemented. I do think that this was a big resource suck for something that some people might not even use, and I think these resources would have been better used in elevating the police to where it's not straight up awful, but I would have liked to see a little bit more focus on the open world elements, but at this point it's just a it is what it is situation. Cyberpunk's 2.0 patch, which extends across the whole game, means that the difficulty has gone up. Easy felt very on par with pre-patch easy, but now normal and above feels like enemies hit much harder and will be a bit smarter and more tactful in combat. Something to keep in mind if you're booting up the game for the first time. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that the visuals and grounded artistic flair in Cyberpunk 2077 are pretty much unmatched, and I'm really looking forward to the day where path tracing is a bit more accessible for us all, because Cyberpunk 2077 from all angles and vantage points looks outstanding. There's a certain cinematic flavor to the game, mainly due to the ray trace lighting and the ambient noises that breathe life into Night City and gives it this unmatched feeling. It's apparent that the more integral story characters, like Johnny, got a little bit more TLC when it comes to realism versus a random NPC you'd find on the street, but the re-implementation of the catchlights give each main character so much more soul. Dead eyes is a common problem in games, and CD PROJEKT RED just doesn't have that issue with Cyberpunk. So there you guys have it, my thoughts on Phantom Liberty. My voice is absolutely gone. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I can't wait to start releasing some of the post-launch content I've been working on. And this is actually my 400th video, so if you've been here from the start, thank you so much for the support. And if you're new here, welcome, and I hope you enjoy. In any case, I will catch you guys in the next video.